Welcome in. We are glad that you are here. Today I'm taking you on a three-part look back at the early years of United Airlines and United Cargo as the company approaches a full century of service in 2026. And if you're wondering why spend so much time looking in the rearview mirror, here's the reason. In aviation, the future usually makes a lot more sense when you understand how we got here.
United's story begins in the dawn of modern flight, when the U.S. government had a big problem to solve. The nation needed a faster way to move mail across the country than the railroads could manage. The obvious thought was, let the railroads fly it. But the railroads weren't interested. So in the earliest days, the job fell to military pilots flying fragile biplanes and surplus World War I aircraft, doing their best to push mail and early air express through a system that was brave, experimental, and, after a string of deadly accidents, simply not sustainable.
That's when the U.S. Post Office shifted strategy. In 1925, it began offering contracts to private companies, paying a handling fee that made the numbers work and encouraged investment. That push soon became known as the Kelly Airmail Act, and the modern airmail era truly took off on November 16, 1926.
One of the key winners in that new world was National Air Transport, or NAT. NAT first secured the Chicago to Dallas airmail route, and not long after it landed what you could fairly call the jackpot, the Chicago to New York contract. That corridor quickly became the center of gravity for mail and express in the United States. High volume, high importance, and a powerful foundation for what would come next.
As the industry consolidated through mergers and acquisitions, the brand we now know as United Airlines was formed in 1931. It was set up as a subsidiary of United Aircraft and Transport Corporation, created to manage a group of airlines that William Boeing had been assembling, including Boeing Air Transport, Pacific Air Transport, Varney Airlines, and NAT, operators tied together by something very specific: U.S. airmail contracts. In other words, the mail didn't just help build routes. It helped build airlines.
And here's one of those history moments that feels almost too perfect when you know what happens later. In 1937, Robert Six acquired a controlling interest in Varney, originally known as Varney Speed Lines, and that carrier eventually became Continental Airlines. Fast forward to 2012, and United and Continental merged, bringing the story full circle. Even today, every United aircraft still carries that Continental-inspired tail design, a stylized globe that for many aviation people echoes the elegance of the 1964 World's Fair Unisphere, still located today in New York City's Flushing Meadow Park. What goes around really does come around in this business.
Before we continue, let me recognize the companies that support this kind of aviation storytelling. ATC Aviation Services, known by many as ATC Always Takes Care, is a major general sales and service agent headquartered in Frankfurt, Germany, in Cargo City South. Founded in 1971, ATC provides cargo sales, management, and operational services for more than 70 international airlines, backed by specialized IT, digital training, and deep air cargo expertise. All with a focus on helping airlines drive revenue and serve customers professionally and transparently. Under the leadership of Ingo Zimmer and a team of seasoned cargo specialists, ATC's mission is straightforward: set a high bar in the GSSA business and help partner airlines grow while keeping customers, employees, and stakeholders at the center of sustainable success.
All right, part 2 of our look back. One of the more imaginative ideas United ever tested in the post-war era. It's the kind of concept that sounds brilliant when you say it out loud. What if you could sort the mail while the airplane is already flying? Not after landing, not in a terminal facility, but in the air, so it hits the ground already processed and ready to move. This story comes through the late Dick Malkin, an editor and pioneer who helped define air cargo journalism beginning in 1948 when he created the first air cargo publication he titled Air Commerce, after covering the Berlin airlift, as air cargo saved a starving, destroyed city.
In 1946, the U.S. Army Air Forces leased United Airlines a single Fairchild C-82A for a short window, from late September into early October, to test an airborne mail processing concept tied to the era's airmail economics.
The aircraft was brand new, coming off the production line in Hagerstown, and it was modified internally by Fairchild to become essentially a flying post office. It even received a name that told you exactly what it was meant to be, the Flying Mail Car, carrying civil registration NC 8855. Inside the cargo hold, the equipment and layout were designed for processing large volumes of mail in flight, sorting, organizing, and bagging so that, in theory, delivery could begin immediately on landing.
Capacity was nothing to shrug at, either. The aircraft could carry up to 6 tons of mail on a roughly 500-mile route, or about 4 tons over a longer 1,200-mile run. The inaugural flight, on October 1, 1946, departed LaGuardia in New York and headed west toward California along U.S. airmail route number 1. On board were up to 13 personnel handling the mail workload in real time. The trip took about 12 hours, and along the way the mail was handled piece by piece, an ambitious blend of logistics and aviation. So why don't we see sorting at 20,000 feet as a normal part of air cargo today? Because even when an idea is clever, it still has to be practical. After only a handful of flights, the concept proved to have limited real-world value, and it was discontinued. The aircraft went back to the USAF in mid-October 1946 for continued military service, and what ultimately became of it decades later remains uncertain.
Before we move into the third part of our salute, here's another supporter worth knowing in the cargo world, PayCargo. PayCargo is a secure B2B payment platform built for shipping and freight, used to pay transportation providers like airlines, ocean carriers, and warehouses online. The big advantage is speed and certainty. Real-time payment notification can mean faster cargo release, fewer delays, and less exposure to demurrage and detention. It also replaces slow manual processes like checks, wires, and cash, and it can integrate into existing transportation management workflows. If you want to learn more, visit paycargo.com.
Now, Part 3 of our celebration brings us back to an airplane that quietly helped define what modern would mean for both passenger travel and cargo carriage, the United Airlines Boeing 247 from the early 1930s. Here is where the 7 series of airplanes serving the world today began from Boeing.
One of the reasons the 247 matters so much is that it wasn't just a passenger airplane that happened to have a little room for cargo. It operated as a true combi-style workhorse for its day, moving people and cargo in a way that foreshadowed later aircraft concepts, right up through iconic combinations like the 747 combi that some carriers used to carry passengers and main deck cargo, even live animals such as horses, depending on the operator and configuration.
United introduced the Boeing 247 in 1933, and in many ways you can draw a straight line from that aircraft to every major Boeing commercial design that followed. The 247 could carry up to about 400 pounds of mail and express on the main deck, positioned behind the lavatory area, and it also introduced cargo handling ideas that feel familiar to anyone who has watched nose-loading freighters at work. In hindsight, you can see the early thinking that would later make aircraft like the 747 freighter so operationally powerful.
Performance is what made the 247 feel like it came from the future. In 1933, cruising around 200 miles per hour and reaching a service ceiling of 25,000 feet was a major leap. When United brought the 247 to the Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago, it didn't just appear, it dominated attention. The message was clear. Here was a safer, more reliable way to move passengers and cargo coast to coast, cutting travel time to roughly 20 hours. Boeing built 75 of the 247s, and 60 of them went to United, which tells you how central the aircraft was to United's network and identity at the time.
But aviation changes fast. The 247's reign at the top didn't last long once Douglas introduced the DC-3 in 1936, an aircraft that reset expectations across the industry. Still, the Boeing 247 holds a special place in history as one of the first truly modern airliners, an all-metal design with major advances like a cantilever wing and retractable landing gear, among other breakthroughs that became standard in the aircraft that followed.
And that brings us to the end of this trip down memory lane. From the government's early push for coast-to-coast airmail, to the private contracts that powered NAT and the formation of United, to a bold experiment that tried sorting mail in midair, and finally to the Boeing 247, an airplane that helped prove you could move passengers, mail, and express reliably, day in and day out. Thanks for listening and for spending your time with me. Until next time, keep them flying, air cargo. And good night, Joe, wherever you are.